Do you have a lot of scrap fabrics? Hi, my name is Fallon and I love to quilt. And since I love to quilt, I always have scrap fabrics on hand. And I have been making quite a few scrappy quilts lately. In between making scrappy quilts, I made a really beautiful layer cake quilt. But with that quilt, I was able to make another quilt with some of the stitch and flip leftovers. And then I promised I would show you another way to use some of the other stitch and flip half square triangles from that quilt. So here are all of the cute little half square triangles left over from that quilt. And I'm going to show you a really fun block that you can make using these and some of your scraps. Now, I know a lot of you do not like to work this small. These are 2-inch squares. So you can always size up to 2.5-inch squares, 3-inch squares, whatever you feel comfortable working with, and just use the same block layout. Now, in my last scrappy quilt video, I asked what was your biggest struggle when it comes to scraps, and quite a few of you said that it's pairing colors together, knowing what designs to pair together, colors and all of that, and I completely understand. Sometimes that is hard for me too, and usually what I do is just pick a color or two. Maybe I'll make a quilt with all of my blue scraps, and that makes me really comfortable to bring a quilt together. Now with this one, I'll tell you, the thing that saves this quilt is having a place for your eye to rest. So using these that are just neutral colors, the black and the gray with the layout that I'm going to show you, your eye has a place to rest all throughout the quilt. And I'm just going to be tossing whatever fabrics I pull out of here into the block, and it just all comes together beautifully. Just trust me on this one. And especially since the squares are cut nice and small, you're not going to focus on designs. You're really just looking at the whole layout as a whole. All right, so here is the block. So for each block, you're going to need 8 half square triangle accents and then 28 fabric scraps. Now you'll notice here that the half square triangles are going to form flying geese, and on opposite sides you're going to have some of the half square triangle points facing into the block and some of the points facing out, and it's going to be the same every single time you make a block. And the reason this will remain the same each time you make the block is because when you sew all your blocks together to form your quilt, the points that are facing in here are going to form squares, or if you want to call them diamonds, they're squares on point. And then the half square triangles that form the points facing out are going to form hourglass blocks. So these will form throughout the quilt, however large you want to make your quilt, and it will give your eye a place to rest within the quilt. Now you don't have to use the same colors I am. You could use whatever colors you want, whatever colors suit the quilt that you are making. But I promise you, if you keep them the same colors and put them in this quilt, it will really bring the scrappiness together for you. Now, like I said, this block is going to take 8 half square triangles. If you have a lot of scraps laying around and you want to cut them to the same size that I am sharing here, your squares are going to be cut to 2-inch squares, and then your half square triangles will be 2-inch half square triangles. If you don't have some leftover half square triangles to use, let me show you how to make some 2-inch half square triangles. So you'll start with 2.5-inch squares. So of course I'm using black and gray, but you'll just want some nice contrasting colors here to accent your quilt. And then you're going to put them right sides together. Here it's solid fabric, so really any side is fine for me, but put them right sides together. If you want, you can draw a line from corner to corner to help guide you. I'm going to use some seam guide tape here. This is from Gypsy Quilter, and I will link to it in the description. It just makes quick work of bringing half square triangles together. So if you're using the tape, you will line up one side of your fabric where the point is with the side of your presser foot, as long as your presser foot is a 1/4 inch. And then the opposite point is going to be lined up with the outer gypsy quilter tape line. Now, if you just drew a line corner to corner, you would line up the side of your 1/4 inch presser foot with that line. All right, so I'm going to sew straight across here, and I'm going to make sure that point stays lined up with the tape line. Now, if I'm going to be making a lot of these, I would just keep chain piecing them here. But I'm going to cut the thread and then do the same thing going in the other direction. So I'm lining up the point with the side of my 1/4 inch presser foot, and then the point of the squares on the opposite side with the line on this seam guide tape. All right, so there we go. So these should be about a 1/2 inch apart. I'm going to press this. Giving it a quick press just makes it lay a little nice and flat and even. I'm going to show this side because you'll see the stitch lines a little bit better and where I'm going to cut. So I'm going to cut these in half, and I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch away from the stitch lines. And then I'm going to press one of them with the seam toward the darker fabric, toward the black fabric. And then I'm going to press the other toward the lighter fabric. And this is because when I bring these together to form the flying geese block, when I put them together, if the seams are pressed in opposite directions and I sew across here, the seams being pressed in opposite directions really reduces the bulk in this block. So that is just something, a little tip for you to help you reduce all of that fabric bulk you can get when you're bringing 1/2 square triangles seams together. All right, so I'm going to press these. And then the last thing we're going to do is trim these to 2 inches. So I have a 2-inch trim lock here. There are a lot of 1/2 square triangle trimmers out there that can make this nice and quick and easy. Just trim up the way that is your favorite. So there is one 1/2 square triangle. They're so cute. I love these little tiny squares. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim up the other one. So I'm just lining the diagonal line going across this trimmer with the seam, and then I'm just going to trim around the block. Just makes really quick work of trimming up 1/2 square triangles, especially if you're doing a lot of them. All right, and so there we go. So there you go. If you need to make some 1/2 square triangles to bring this block together, that is a quick way to make some 1/2 square triangles 2 at a time. All right, so we're going to bring this block together, and my favorite way to bring this block together is by sewing it together kind of in a net or webbing it together. There are different terms that I've heard for this technique. And to do that, I'm going to start by taking the first 2 squares in the first row, place them right sides together, and then I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm just going to line up the side of my presser foot. That's a 1/4 inch presser foot. This is technically a scant 1/4 inch, but I'm going to use the same presser foot throughout this quilt, so it's fine. Then I took the next 2 squares in the second row. I'm going to place them right sides together, and I did not cut my thread. So I'm going to have thread holding this whole row together. And then I'm going to keep working that way down the first 2 squares in each row. When you get to the 1/2 square triangles, just make sure you don't turn them and change the orientation of them. All right, so I'm not going to cut any of these threads. They're all linked together and it will be very, very helpful for us. So I'm going to take the first row and I'm going to press the seam to the left and then the second to the right. And I'm going to keep working in opposite directions. And this will help me nest the seams when I bring all of these rows together. All right, and so you can press this all later if you want to. I kind of like to press each time I add a row on. So I am going to press this. And now it's laying all nice and flat and it just makes it a little easier for me to keep working through this block. It's just honestly personal preference if you want to press as you go. So I'm just going to take the next square in each row and sew it on, right sides together, 1/4 inch seam, and I'm not going to cut any of the threads again this time either. Honestly, this block comes together so fast, as long as your half square triangles are already made, of course. They can be a little bit tedious if you need to make them for this block. But I honestly think they're fun to make. I know some people don't love making half square triangles, and that's okay. But I quite enjoy bringing them together. All right, and so I'm going to press this next seam in each row in the same direction as the first one. So to the left, to the right, and then just alternate. All right, and so then I'm going to press this with my iron, add some heat to it just to keep it nice and flat and organized. And again, I didn't cut any of the threads, so this is coming together beautifully. The threads keep everything aligned so that I can bring the block together without even thinking about it once I get all of the rows finished. All right, so I'm just going to keep adding on the rest of these little squares until I get a 6 by 6 block. And that's 6 squares, 6 by 6 with the squares. That's not the size of it. It's not 6 inches by 6 inches. All right, so we're sewing on the last square in each row, and then we'll be able to bring this block together. I really love sewing these scrappy quilts because when I am sewing it together, I see all these fabrics from quilts I've made. You know, some of the fabrics years ago I used. So I don't know, I just think it's fun seeing them and remembering the quilt that I made with the fabric. And I just think it's a lot of fun. See, how fun is that? Since we didn't cut any of those threads, the block just holds together for us and we're not going to get all mixed up when we sew the rows together. So it's a lot of fun, I think, bringing a block together this way if you can. Now, since we also pressed the seams in each row in opposite directions, the seams are going to nest together nicely. You're not going to have a lot of bulk at the seams. You'll have nice points and it's going to make it a breeze to sew all these rows together. If you want to, you can place a pin where each seam comes together. You can see how it lays flat there, stick a pin in there, but I'm just going to sew across here and just use my fingers to hold where the seams are and align them up. And also some of these squares I cut years ago, and some of them aren't cut that great. So a few times I've come across some that are a little off, and I just work with it. Like this one here at the end is probably not going to line up perfectly, but for me, that's okay. I don't need any of my quilts to be absolutely perfect. I just like them to be perfect-ish. Let's get it close. That's about it. So I'm going to finger press through here, and they actually all lined up pretty good. So I'm going to finger press this seam, and in this instance, I'm just going to keep sewing each row. I'm not going to press each row as I work. If you want to, definitely do that. So I'm just feeling where the seams are and sewing across. Again, if you want to put some pins through here, if that makes you feel more comfortable, definitely do that. Honestly, when I get to each seam, when I'm feeling it and adjusting to make sure they're lining up, probably could have just taken the time to put pins through here, and it would have been the same amount of time that I could have just sewed across quickly. But we all have our preferred way to work, I think. All right, so I'm going to finger press that, get it all laying together, and I'll just keep working through here, sewing each row together. All right, so here is this amazing scrappy block. You seriously won't be able to make just one quilt using this block. You'll have all different kinds of color combinations you could do for these accent half square triangles, and you'll just love seeing how this quilt comes together with all the busy scrappy squares throughout the quilt, but your eye will be able to rest on all of the square in squares and all of the hourglass blocks that are created throughout this quilt, and you'll just love it. You'll be amazed at how quickly you can make a scrappy quilt without having to fuss over what designs are in your scraps or what colors are in your scraps, because the accents with these half square triangles will just unify the quilt on its own. I promise. Give it a try. So here is a quick look at the quilt coming together. Now the blocks unfinished are 9.5 inches, so finished they are 9-inch blocks. So keep that in mind for how many blocks you might want to make the size quilt that you are interested in making. So let me know in the comments if you are going to make this scrappy block and perhaps even a quilt. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.